Last time, we left Dante and his beloved Lady Beatrice soaring onwards and upwards into the bliss of heaven's highest realms. Yet before leaving this world of time and form altogether, Beatrice had counselled Dante to look back, and he had turned then and looked to the earth through all the realms he had travelled, all the way back to his own lost self at the start of his long quest. Canto 1, Inferno, is the furthest distance from this heaven's bliss, with its sublime songs of love, a place utterly devoid of music, the densest frequency within Dante's cosmology. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, inizia Dante, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la diritta via era smarrita. Midway upon the journey of our life, Dante begins, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. This is where we begin, with Dante at midway in the journey of our life, lost in a dark wood. It is clear from the use of the term our life that what follows will not only be autobiographical, but will have a general applicability too. It will be Dante's story, but it will be our story too, personal and also universal. He has no idea how suddenly he has found himself in such a place. I cannot well repeat how there I entered in, he tells us. So full was I of slumber at that moment. All without knowing then, it seems to Dante, and perhaps to us too, at our own midlife, when suddenly we find ourselves lost. The values of the morning, said Carl Jung, cannot be carried over to the afternoon and eventide of our lives. Midlife, therefore, is a great turning point, a moment in time when all at once our world may look different and bleak and unfamiliar, and we struggle to orient ourselves as before. The structure of Dante's poem, as we will see it unfold, mirrors that of the hero's journey, an idea brought to our collective attention by the mythographer Joseph Campbell in his book The Hero with 1,000 Faces, in which he compares myths and legends from across the globe and identifies a common pattern, a common theme. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day, he tells us, into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. And very often, these boons, these treasures and gifts, take the form of story. The quest for the Holy Grail is one such tale, as is Homer's Odyssey and Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. All are variants of one deeply rooted archetypal theme. A theme hardwired, it seems, into the very fabric and ancient memory of the human psyche. It is the story of a lost and forgotten paradise, and of how that paradise might be remembered and regained. The characters and circumstances of these tales may differ, the time, the place, but the pattern is essentially the same, and this is what we see reflected clearly in La Divina Commedia. So then, who is this Dante Alighieri, setting forth upon his quest, and how had he come to be so lost? To answer, we must tell a little of his story. My name is Dante Alighieri. I was born in Florence in 1265, 200 years before Brunelleschi built the dome for our cathedral. At that time, there were 17,000 souls living in the city, and of these, around 7,000 children were in school. I too received an initial education, first from Franciscan monks, and then later at the University of Bologna, where I studied the liberal arts curriculum. My love of poetry began at a very young age, brought into being through the death of my mother, my first great agony, and then meeting the lady Beatrice when I was 9 years old, my first great ecstasy. Both of us were betrothed and later married to others, as was the custom, but I continued to adore her. Then, in 1290, she died suddenly. In terrible, unbearable grief, I wrote La Vita Nuova, the new life, a collection of poems, songs and sonnets written in my lady's praise, dating back to our very first meeting. In 1295, I entered into public life and joined the Guild of Apothecaries, and later became a magistrate of the city. But my grief was deep, and my wounds did not heal. Then, just a few years later in 1302, whilst on a short trip to Rome, a rival faction took power in my dear Florence, and I was exiled on pain of death by fire if I ever returned. Of Dante's exile, the poets say, "Thou shalt abandon each and everything most dear to thee. That shaft's the first that e'er the bow of exile looses from the string. Thou shalt by sharp experience be aware how salt the bread of strangers is, how hard the up and down of someone else's stair." Dante lived out the rest of his life in exile, divested of all property and station, and with this terrible threat on his life. He travelled from city to city, eventually settling in Ravenna. His life was hard, and yet we are told, and who knows how long such things can take, that the realization gradually dawned upon him that he had somehow been set free from the bonds of political life, and in some ways exile would turn out to be the best thing that could have happened. For it enabled him to see his former life from a different perspective and to take up his calling as a writer and poet. He produced several books on language and philosophy, most notably in 1304, De Vulgari Eloquentia, The Eloquence of the Vernacular. Yet the book that concerns us most here, and which really set the scene for his Commedia, is La Vita Nuova, The New Life, the book completed after Beatrice's death, in which he had told the story of his great love. A book which had ended with a challenge to himself, a challenge to finally move beyond his private grief, to finally understand the nature of his love for Beatrice, to lift their story out of the purely personal dimension into the collective and universal, another realm entirely. And in exile, however painful, Dante can finally set himself to this task. What follows will be his divine comedy. But in order to understand how Dante arrives here, we must first look more deeply into his La Vita Nuova. But for now, we leave him in Ravenna, waiting for the moment to begin his great work.